All right, welcome to the lecture Semiotics, Rhetoric, the Internet, and You. I walked into a Starbucks not too long ago, and this is what I saw. And of course, the irony is I took this picture with my own cell phone. But it got me thinking a little bit more deeply about what's really happening to us now that we have the internet in the palm of our hands. And so I thought I would begin with this image to just kind of set the tone. It's become what we call ubiquitous, meaning all around us. It seems to be perfectly normal to be in public spaces having these sort of other private experiences, even though, in many regards, as this lecture will illustrate, the internet is not really a private place. So to begin, I want to talk a little bit about what semiotics is, because this term will come up again, and it sort of sets the tone of how we will be looking at the various objects, signs, codes, symbols that we'll be looking at this semester. In short, semiotics is the study of signs, and these signs might be artificial signs created by man, like literal signposts, but also they could be symbolic or they could be linguistic. As far as language, as far as linguistics, if you think for just a moment about the difference between the word house and the word home, that while both of these words might denote the same thing, a structure in which people live, house has a very different connotation than home. Home tends to conjure images of coziness. Maybe you visualize a little fireplace. It's a comfortable space. There's something safe about that word. So there's what the word means, but then there's all this other meaning that the word carries with it. And that meaning comes from our system in which we live. We have various systems all around us operating, telling us how we should be operating. Another way to think about semiotics is to think about what you buy, and that even when you think you're buying something without being influenced, whatever it is that you've purchased, it says something about you. It says something about your identity. It gives other people a way to read you in a sense. And so this idea of semiotics, this lens of semiotics, really asks us to look more closely at how meaning is made. So how the things that are significant to us in our lives, how do they come to be that way? What are the sort of other influences that give meaning to what otherwise might be fairly meaningless things? Now, a subset of semiotics is rhetoric, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about rhetoric here because I've posted two YouTube videos that I think do a really excellent job of explaining Aristotle's theory of rhetoric. The video goes into the three types of rhetoric that he defines: epideictic, deliberative, and forensic, and I will keep you in suspense. You can watch that video to find out what those three types are. And then the three major types of appeals that we try to make to people in terms of ethos, pathos, and logos, which stands for, a lot of times people will translate ethos as ethics, but it's got more to do with character and rapport and credibility and trustworthiness. So while ethics has something to do with it, we can't just literally translate it that way. Pathos has to do with making emotional appeals. And then there's logos, which is appealing to one's sense of logic. So rhetoric is its kind of own system that cues people in terms of how they should feel about the argument that we're making. And so we use these various tools of rhetoric to help persuade people of our point of view. So you should watch that video because it will come up in the discussion questions for this week when we do a little kind of rhetorical analysis of the YouTube videos. Impossible is nothing, and impossible is the opposite of possible. Moving on to talk more specifically about the internet. When I think of the net or the World Wide Web, as we called it in the 90s. I think of that line from the poem Marmion by Sir Walter Scott. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. And this sort of ties in with some of the points that I want to make in this lecture. Now, there is what I would call the good web, where we can use the internet, we can use social media sites for social good. In a lot of ways, the internet has given us more access, not only just to each other, but to various dialogues that have helped to spur social movements, political movements around the globe. So it has had some very positive effects. Additionally, we're able in a more democratic way to publicize issues that matter to us, that we think in our own communities are of great importance, that our mainstream media might overlook or undermine deliberately. So social media in particular, and the internet as a whole, does create a platform wherein we can subvert some of the negative elements of social control when we feel oppressed or confined. And in addition, I've had some of my friends refer to Facebook as the hive mind, where we're all just sort of buzzing around and talking to each other like a little beehive, is kind of how she perceives it. But in a lot of ways, the internet is sort of becoming this concrete, well, it's digital, but we can see it, we experience it, this kind of artifact of collective consciousness. And as such, it is allowing humanity to look more carefully at the mapping of the mind and how the brain functions. And so we're going to kind of explore this a little bit more this week, but also next week when we really look at Google and how technology is really affecting quite literally the way that we think as human beings. But I want us to start thinking about what this means, not just in terms of the effects or what it might be causing, what some of the consequences are, but in terms of what it means semiotically. So what is this a sign of? What's the meaning under the meaning, so to speak? And that will start to make sense to you the more we delve in and we analyze. So I love this creepy picture from Dolly because one thing about the internet is that, as I said earlier, there's nothing really private unless you are a hacker and you know how to keep things, totally to yourself. The majority of people are completely exposed on the internet, even when we enter into privacy agreements with websites and such. And so I really invite you to think about the question, does internet privacy really exist? And if not, who's watching us? And you'll notice this is just a screenshot I took a couple of weeks ago when I popped onto Firefox. And of course, there's the creepy eyeball again, but that caught my attention. And they were, Firefox is doing a survey, Mozilla's doing a survey to kind of get a sense of what people think about the United States government collecting information about us by surveilling our internet usage. And of course, it doesn't, I don't know, this is just my own opinion. So you don't have to really put too much stock in it, but it's sort of disheartening because it feels as though even though we might not agree with being surveilled, I just don't know how much choice we really have. So this is another question that I put to you to consider this summer, is that can we really choose to live outside this tangled web, or are we kind of forced to participate? And even just thinking back at the earlier image of people on their phones, not really even thinking about what they're doing, but just kind of freely handing over this information about themselves. I want us to really think about what's going on there. And especially when we get into Black Mirror and whatnot, I think it will help to deepen our understanding of what's happening there. But of course, people do sort of try to find ways to maintain privacy on the internet by creating aliases and whatnot, not representing themselves maybe truthfully, completely honestly on the internet. Now, I guess The word out there is that Mark Zuckerberg says that doing this shows a lack of integrity. But you can see here from this meme that someone created that there are a lot of reasons why people might feel safer creating an alias and not just putting their full name and their true image out on the internet. So I also invite you to think about whether or not it's possible for us to be anonymous, not anonymous the hacker group, but although they are important, and that could be a good analysis or a good research paper if you were so inclined to really kind of examine what's going on there with them. But what does it mean for humanity if anonymity is no longer possible? If there's nowhere to hide, if there's nowhere to have your privacy, if there's nowhere to conduct private business, or is anonymity something that only certain people will have access to? Okay, so that's another question I want us to think about. Also, and we're going to really get into this, and especially as you read the heterotopia of Facebook, when we think about the tools that are at our disposal when we create ourselves online, when we represent ourselves online, we have profile pictures, status updates, links, memes, comments that we make. What do all of these things say about who we are? And I don't want us to think about this just in terms of what we choose to post, but what do these specific things that Facebook allows us to do, the ways in which Facebook permits us to represent ourselves, and the fact that this is a wildly popular site, that once again, I mean, people like this. They like this format. They use it. What does that say about who we are? Not necessarily individually, but as a group, as a human group. And so finally, to kind of just bring this all to a head and sum up, in some ways, aspects of the internet, such as social media sites, force us to become someone other than we are offline. So I'm interested to learn more about how you might represent yourself online. Are you honest? Do you use an alias? Do you refrain from posting pictures of your actual face on Facebook? Do you deceive a little in order to protect your privacy? And we could also discuss the sort of ethics behind this. And I also want us to take a closer look at the ways in which Facebook controls how we communicate. So just as I said, in terms of the options that we're given, we have very specific parameters in which we are permitted to represent ourselves. And so even though Facebook boasts this power to create human connections, and indeed we are able to connect more broadly and globally, but how does it also prevent us from truly connecting with one another? And not just that, but how does it create a self divided? So I hope that you'll enjoy the YouTube videos that we're going to analyze, but also trying to look at the social network a little bit more deeply, not just as a movie about Mark Zuckerberg, but really as a way of trying to understand like the rise in Facebook's popularity and what's really going on under there, and how is Facebook, what's the meaning of it all, and then also how does it play into the way that we understand ourselves individually and as a human community. All right, I look forward to hearing more from you in this week's forum.